The heavy wooden doors of the Cook County Circuit Court didn't just close. They sealed a tomb. Inside, the air was stale smelling of floor wax and anxious sweat. But the loudest sound in the room wasn't the judge's gavel or the aggressive objections of a high-priced attorney. It was the sickening thud of a body hitting the mahogany floorboards. Sarah Jenkins, 8 months pregnant and trembling, had collapsed. Across the aisle, her husband didn't flinch. His mistress, sitting in the front row wearing a designer dress that cost more than Sarah's car, didn't gasp. She smirked. They thought the war was over. They thought the money, the house, and the future were secured. But they forgot that in a courtroom, the deadliest weapon isn't a lawyer. It's a simple piece of paper with a DNA sequence on it. And Judge Harrison was about to read it. The downfall of Sarah Jenkins's life didn't happen all at once. It happened in jagged, agonizing shards. It began on a Tuesday in November, the kind of Chicago morning where the wind whips off the lake and cuts right through your coat. Sarah was sitting in the breakfast nook of their Victorian home in Lake Forest. The house was a sprawling estate, the type that appeared in architectural magazines, which was fitting since her husband Robert Jenkins was the city's most sought-after architect. Sarah rested a hand on her swollen stomach. 32 weeks. It had been a difficult journey to get here. 3 years of negative tests, hormonal treatments, and silent tears in the guest bathroom. But finally, they were here. A baby boy. "Rob, do you have the meeting with the contractors today?" Sarah asked, pouring coffee. Robert entered the kitchen, adjusting his silk tie. He was handsome, in a sharp, predatory way, jawline carved from granite eyes that used to look at Sarah with warmth, but had recently turned into cold blue glass. "Yes," Robert said, not looking at her. "I'll be late. Don't wait up. You've been late every night for a month, Rob. Dr. Evans said I need help around the house. My blood pressure is creeping up." Robert stopped. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "And I'm building an empire to pay for that house and that doctor, Sarah. Stop nagging. It's unattractive." He grabbed his keys and left without a kiss. The silence he left behind was heavy. Sarah sighed, reaching for his iPad to check the family calendar. She needed to know when he was free for the Lamar's class. The iPad, usually locked, was sitting open on the counter. He had forgotten it in his rush. She went to the calendar app, but a banner notification dropped down from the top of the screen. It was a text message. Sender Jessica Work message. "I left my earrings on your nightstand at the hotel. Bring them to the office also. I miss you already. Last night was explosive." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands shook so violently, she almost dropped the tablet. Jessica Work. Jessica Reynolds, the 24-year-old junior interior designer Robert had hired 6 months ago. The one who smiled too much at the company Christmas party. Sarah's thumb hovered over the message. She shouldn't look. She should pretend she didn't see it. But she clicked. The thread was a catalogue of betrayal. It wasn't just a fling. It was a full-blown parallel life. "She's so huge, Rob. It's gross. I can't believe you have to touch her. I don't touch her, Jess. I haven't in months. I'm just waiting until the brat is born to serve the papers. I need the optics to look good for the custody battle. Make sure you transfer the assets to the Cayman account before you file." Sarah gagged. She rushed to the sink and dry-heaved. He wasn't just cheating. He was planning to dismantle her. He was liquidating their savings, hiding money, and planning to take the baby she had fought so hard to conceive. She didn't confront him that night. She did something harder. She printed the screenshots. She went to the bank and pulled the statements. She saw the withdrawals, $10,000 here, $5,000 there, labeled as consulting fees paid to J. Reynolds Design. When Robert came home 3 days later, Sarah was sitting in the living room. The lights were off. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" Robert asked, flipping the switch. Sarah threw the stack of papers onto the coffee table. "Explosive night, Robert." Robert froze. He looked at the papers, then at Sarah. Most men would panic. Most men would apologize. Robert Jenkins simply sighed as if he were disappointed in her for ruining his evening. "You went through my things," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You're sleeping with your assistant. You're stealing our money." "It's my money, Sarah. I earned it. You just sat here and got fat." "I'm pregnant with your child," she screamed, rising to her feet, though the effort made her dizzy. Robert laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "About that. I've been thinking. I'm not sure I want to be tethered to you for the next 18 years. Jessica and I, we have a future, a real one." "Get out," Sarah whispered. "No," Robert said, stepping closer, looming over her. "This is my house. My name is on the deed. You're the one who's leaving." He pulled his phone out. "I anticipated this might happen today. I've already cancelled your credit card, Sarah, and I spoke to the bank. The joint account is frozen pending an investigation into unusual activity. You have zero access to funds." "You can't do that." "I just did. You have an hour to pack a bag. Jessica is moving in tonight." "Tonight? Are you insane?" "She needs a place to stay. Her lease is up, and frankly, she has better taste in decor than you do." That was the moment the crash happened. Not the physical fainting that would come later, but the crash of her reality. Sarah realized she wasn't dealing with a heartbreak. She was dealing with a sociopath. The humiliation of that night was etched into Sarah's memory, like a scar. She packed 2 suitcases with trembling hands, while Robert stood in the doorway sipping a scotch, watching her to make sure she didn't steal anything of value. "That necklace," he pointed as she packed a diamond pendant. "That was a gift from my mother. Leave it." "It was a birthday present, Rob. Leave it, or I call the police and tell them you're looting the marital assets." She left it. She left the crib she had just assembled. She left the nursery painted a soft sage green. It was snowing when she dragged her suitcases down the driveway. Her Honda Civic, thankfully in her name, was cold and refused to start for 3 agonizing minutes. As the engine finally turned over, a sleek red Mercedes convertible pulled into the driveway. Jessica Reynolds stepped out. She was stunning, there was no denying it. Tall, raven-haired, with skin that looked like it had never known a day of stress. She wore a white cashmere coat that Sarah knew cost $4,000 because she had seen the charge on the credit card statement 2 weeks ago. Jessica spotted Sarah's car. She didn't look away. She walked right up to the driver's side window and tapped on the glass. Sarah rolled it down 2 inches. "What do you want?" "Just wanted to say no hard feelings," Jessica said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Rob speaks very highly of... Well, he doesn't speak of you at all, really. But I'm sure you'll land on your feet. Maybe a smaller apartment. Something more, your speed. He's using you, Jessica." Sarah warned, her voice hoarse, "just like he used me." Jessica laughed, throwing her head back. "Honey, look at you, and look at me. He's not using me. He's upgrading. Drive safe. I hear the roads are icy." Jessica turned and walked up the steps of Sarah's home. Robert opened the door, pulling her into a passionate kiss right there on the porch under the light, knowing Sarah was watching. Sarah drove to a Motel 6 on the outskirts of the city. It was all she could afford with the $200 cash she had in her wallet. She sat on the lumpy mattress, the neon sign buzzing outside the window, and cried until she threw up. The next morning, the war began. Sarah needed a lawyer, but Robert had been thorough. He had conflicted out the top 5 divorce firms in Chicago by having initial consultations with all of them, meaning they couldn't represent Sarah. She ended up in a strip mall in a rundown part of town, staring at a glass door that read, "David Cohen, Attorney at Law." David Cohen looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He was in his 50s, wearing a rumpled suit and a tie with a mustard stain. His office was piled high with files. But when Sarah told him her story, his tired eyes sharpened. "He froze the assets?" Cohen asked, scribbling furiously on a yellow pad. "Everything, even the savings for the baby. And the mistress moved in same day." "Yes." Cohen tapped his pen against the desk. "This guy is arrogant. Arrogant guys make mistakes. He thinks he can starve you out. He thinks you'll sign a bad settlement just to get grocery money." "I just want what's fair," Sarah said, rubbing her stomach. "I want to be able to raise my son." "No," Cohen said, looking up. "We don't go for fair. Fair is for people who play by the rules. We go for the throat. But I have to warn you, Sarah. A guy like Robert Jenkins, he's going to play dirty. He's going to try to destroy your character." "I have nothing to hide." Cohen gave her a sad smile. "Everyone has something, Sarah. And if they don't, men like Robert invent it." 2 weeks later, the motion for temporary support came before the court. Robert arrived flanked by 2 attorneys from Vanderbilt and Associates, the most expensive firm in the state. He looked impeccable. When the judge asked why Robert had cut off his pregnant wife's funds, Robert's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor." The lawyer smoothed his suit jacket. "Mr. Jenkins froze the accounts because he has reason to believe that Mrs. Jenkins is mentally unstable and was planning to abscond with the funds. Furthermore," the lawyer paused for dramatic effect. "Furthermore, Mr. Jenkins has significant doubts regarding the paternity of the unborn child." The courtroom went silent. Sarah gasped. "That's a lie!" she shouted, standing up. "He knows it's his—" "Sit down, Miss Jenkins," the judge barked. "We are requesting a court-ordered DNA test once the child is born." Robert's lawyer continued smoothly. "Until then, we believe no spousal support should be awarded, as this marriage was based on fraud." It was a stall tactic. Cohen whispered to her, "He knows it's his. He just wants to delay paying you until after the baby comes, hoping you'll be too broke to fight." The judge, a stern man named Judge Harrison, peered over his glasses. "I will grant a temporary stipend, $500 a month." "500, Cohen argued. "Your Honor, she can't rent a room for that. He makes $500,000 a year." "Pending the DNA results," Judge Harrison said, banging the gavel. "Next case." Sarah walked out of the courtroom, feeling like she had been punched. $500. It wouldn't even cover food and gas. Robert walked past her in the hallway. He leaned in close. "I told you, Sarah. I win. You lose. Why don't you just give up, sign the papers, admit you cheated, and I'll give you 20 grand to walk away." "I never cheated." "Does it matter?" Robert smirked. "I have the money. I have the lawyers. I write the history." He walked away laughing with his legal team. Life became a blur of survival. Sarah moved out of the motel and into a small basement studio apartment in a rough neighborhood. The heating was loud and the windows drafted, but it was a roof. She picked up shifts answering phones at a taxi dispatch center, one of the few places that would hire a woman 8 months pregnant. The stress was taking a toll. Her blood pressure was dangerously high. Dr. Evans warned her, "Sarah, you need bed rest. If you keep going like this, you're going to develop preeclampsia. It could kill you or the baby." "I can't rest," Sarah said, holding back tears. "If I don't work, we don't eat." One afternoon, Sarah realized she had left her grandmother's antique recipe book at the Lake Forest house. It was worthless monetarily, but it was the only thing she had left of her family. She knew Robert and Jessica would be at work. Robert had a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new skyscraper, and Jessica usually went with him to pose for photos. Sarah drove to the house. She still had her key. Robert, in his arrogance, hadn't changed the locks yet, probably assuming she wouldn't dare return. She parked down the street and walked up. The house looked different. There were new curtains. A new landscaping crew was working on the hedges. She slipped in through the side door. The kitchen had been remodeled. Her favorite yellow tiles were gone, replaced by cold grey slate. Jessica's mark was everywhere. Sarah found the book in the pantry shoved behind some protein powder. She clutched it to her chest and turned to leave. Suddenly she heard voices from the living room. "It's perfect, isn't it?" It was Jessica's voice. "It's adorable, Jess. You've done an amazing job." A friend's voice. Sarah froze. She crept down the hallway and peered into the living room. The room was filled with balloons, pink balloons. There were gifts piled high on the coffee table, the same table where Sarah had thrown the printed text messages. It was a baby shower. But Sarah wasn't invited. Jessica was standing in the center of the room, wearing a tight pink dress. She turned, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Jessica had a bump, a small, barely there bump, but undeniable. "I can't believe Rob is going to be a dad again. So soon," one of the friends squealed. Jessica laughed, touching her stomach. "Well, let's just say, this is the real heir. Rob is so excited. He says the practice run with his ex was a disaster, but this is perfection. We're naming her Victoria." Sarah felt the room spin. Pregnant Jessica was pregnant. The timeline, if she was showing she was at least 3 or 4 months along. That meant they were conceiving while Sarah was struggling through her second trimester. Sarah stepped back, her foot landing on a creaky floorboard. The room went silent. Jessica turned. Her eyes widened, then narrowed into slits. "What are you doing here?" Jessica hissed. The guests turned to look. Sarah stood there, clutching the old recipe book, wearing her thrift store maternity coat, looking worn and exhausted. I just came for my book," Sarah stammered. Jessica marched over. "Get out! You're trespassing." "You're pregnant," Sarah whispered. Jessica smirked, smoothing her dress over her small belly. "Yes, and unlike you, I carry it well. Rob is over the moon. He's actually planning to sign the house over to me next week, for Victoria's security." "He can't do that. This is marital property," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "He can do whatever he wants," Jessica spat. "He's Robert Jenkins. Now get out before I call the cops and tell them you attacked me. I'm sure a judge would love to hear how the jealous ex-wife tried to harm the new fiancé and her unborn child." Sarah fled. She ran to her car, heart pounding, vision blurring. She called Cohen immediately. "She's pregnant, David. She's having a baby, too." "This complicates things," Cohen said, his voice grave. "But it also explains why he's so desperate to cut you off. He needs the money for the new family. Sarah, listen to me. We have the final hearing next week. The big one. The trial for custody and settlement. "I can't face them," Sarah sobbed. "You have to. We're going to subpoena his medical records. We're going to subpoena everything. But Sarah, I found something weird in the financial discovery." "What?" "Robert has been paying a fertility clinic in Switzerland. A lot of money. Did you guys use a clinic in Zurich?" "No," Sarah said. "We used the City Fertility Center here in Chicago. Why Switzerland?" "I don't know yet," Cohen said. "But I'm going to find out. Get some rest. Next week is going to be a bloodbath." The morning of the trial was grey and oppressive, the kind of Chicago winter day that felt like the sky was pressing down on the city. Sarah Jenkins stood before the bathroom mirror in her basement apartment, trying to zip up a black maternity dress she had bought at a consignment shop. It was tight across the chest and frayed at the hem, but it was the only formal thing she had left. She looked tired. Dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes, and her face was puffy from water retention. She was 38 weeks pregnant. She shouldn't be going to war. She should be nesting. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "For the baby." Her phone buzzed. It was David Cohen. "Meet me at the south entrance. I don't want you walking through the press alone." Robert called the paparazzi. Of course he did. Robert didn't just want to win. He wanted an audience. When Sarah arrived at the courthouse, the flashbulbs blinded her. Reporters shouted questions that felt like accusations. "Sarah, is it true the baby isn't his? Sarah, did you really embezzle money from his firm? Comment on the affair with the pool boy." She kept her head down, clutching her stomach until Cohen's hand grabbed her elbow and steered her through the metal detectors. "Don't listen to them," Cohen said, his voice grim. "That's the narrative Robert is spinning. We stick to the facts." Inside courtroom 304, the atmosphere was stifling. The heating system was blasting, making the air dry and suffocating. On the left side of the aisle sat Robert Jenkins. He looked like a king holding court. He wore a navy bespoke suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. Next to him sat Jessica Reynolds. Jessica was glowing. She wore a cream-colored dress that highlighted her small baby bump, just enough to be noticeable, but tasteful. She looked the picture of the supportive, innocent fiancé. When Sarah walked in, Jessica leaned over and whispered something to Robert. They both chuckled. Sarah lowered herself into the plaintiff's chair. The wood was hard, and her back immediately began to throb. "All rise," the bailiff boomed. Judge Harrison swept in. He was an older man with a face like crumpled parchment and eyes that missed nothing. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the two tables. "We are here for the matter of Jenkins versus Jenkins," the judge said. "Final hearing on divorce custody and asset division. Mr. Sterling, you may begin for the respondent." Robert's lawyer, Arthur Sterling, stood up. He was a man known in legal circles as the Shark. He didn't walk. He glided. "Your Honor." Sterling began, his voice smooth as velvet. "This case is simple. It is a tragedy, really. A tragedy of a man, my client, who worked tirelessly to build a life and empire for his family. And how was he repaid? With deceit, with infidelity, with fraud." Sterling turned to point a finger at Sarah. "We will prove that Sarah Jenkins has been unfaithful. We will prove that she has plotted to steal from my client. And most painfully, we will prove that the child she carries is not the biological son of Robert Jenkins. Therefore, under the prenuptial agreement's morality clause, she is entitled to nothing. No alimony, no house, no custody." Sarah gripped the table. Morality clause. She didn't remember a morality clause. "Lies," she whispered. "Hush," Cohen said, writing furiously. "Let him talk. He's overplaying his hand." The morning session was a blur of misery. Robert took the stand first. He was charming, articulate, and completely sociopathic. He painted a picture of Sarah as a lazy, spending-obsessed shrew who refused to have intimacy with him. "I tried, Your Honor," Robert said, looking at the jury box even though there was no jury, only the judge. "I wanted a family, but she became distant. She was always on her phone, disappearing for hours. Then when she announced the pregnancy, the timing just didn't add up." "Didn't add up how?" Sterling asked. "I was away on business in Tokyo during the conception window," Robert lied effortlessly. "When I confronted her, she became hysterical. That's when I knew." Cohen cross-examined him, but Robert was slippery. He had an answer for everything. "The Tokyo trip." "Oh, I came back a day early, but I stayed at a hotel. But we weren't intimate." Then it was Jessica's turn. She walked to the stand, placing a protective hand over her belly. She swore to tell the truth, then sat down, crossing her legs elegantly. "Ms. Reynolds," Sterling asked, "when did your relationship with Mr. Jenkins begin?" "Only after they were separated." Jessica lied. Robert was broken. He was living in a house with a woman who hated him. I listened. We fell in love after he moved into the guest room." "And you are currently expecting?" Jessica smiled a dazzling, victorious smile. "Yes, a baby girl. Robert is so happy to finally have a child of his own, a biological child." She emphasized the word biological while looking directly at Sarah. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. The audacity. The sheer unadulterated evil of it. They were erasing her. They were rewriting her entire life while she sat there, heavy with the child Robert had begged for 3 years ago. "Your witness," Sterling said. Cohen stood up. "Ms. Reynolds, isn't it true you were sending intimate texts to Mr. Jenkins 4 months before the separation date?" "We were colleagues," Jessica said coolly. "We were close. If you interpret professional closeness as intimacy, that's your problem. And the text where you called his wife gross and huge." Cohen held up the screenshot. Jessica didn't flinch. "I was referring to her attitude. Her entitlement was huge. It was a metaphor." Robert chuckled from his table. The judge looked annoyed but didn't intervene. By the time the lunch recess was called, Sarah felt weak. She hadn't eaten since the night before because of the nausea. She struggled to stand up. "Sarah, we need to hit back hard this afternoon," Cohen said. "I have the Swiss documents, but I need you to testify. You need to tell the judge the truth about the timeline. Can you do it?" Sarah looked at Robert and Jessica, who were leaving the courtroom arm in arm, laughing about where to go for lunch. "Yes," Sarah said, a fire igniting in her belly. "Put me on the stand." The afternoon sun slanted through the high windows of the courtroom, creating beams of dust that danced in the stale air. The heat had been turned up, or maybe it was just Sarah's body regulating poorly. She felt a sheen of cold sweat on her forehead. "Call your next witness," Judge Harrison ordered. "I call Sarah Jenkins," Cohen announced. Sarah stood up. The short walk to the witness stand felt like a mule. Her feet were swollen in her shoes, throbbing with every heartbeat. She navigated the small gate and sat in the heavy wooden chair. She swore the oath. Her voice was shaky, but clear. Cohen began gently. He walked her through the years of infertility treatments, the negative tests, the nights Robert held her, while she cried. He established that this baby was a miracle they had both prayed for. "And when did you conceive?" Cohen asked. "March 14th, Sarah said. "I know the date because it was our anniversary. Robert cooked dinner. We were happy. So he was not in Tokyo." "No, he was in our kitchen." "Objection," Sterling shouted. "Hearsay." "Overruled," the judge muttered. "Sarah," Cohen asked, leaning on the podium, "did you ever cheat on your husband?" "Never." Sarah said, tears pricking her eyes. "I loved him. I thought he loved me." No further questions. Then Arthur Sterling stood up. He buttoned his jacket and approached the stand like a hunter, closing in on wounded prey. "Mrs. Jenkins," Sterling started, his voice dripping with condescension. "You say you were happy, yet you admit you were taking antidepressants in 2022. Is that the behavior of a happy woman?" "I was depressed because we lost a pregnancy," Sarah defended herself. "Ah, so you were unstable." "I was grieving." "And isn't it true?" Sterling continued, stepping closer, invading her personal space, "that during this grief you reconnected with an old college flame, a Mr. Mark Daniels." Sarah blinked. "Mark? I haven't seen Mark in 10 years. He lives in London. We have records of phone calls." Sterling waved a piece of paper. It was a bluff, Sarah knew it, but it was disorienting. "That's not true," Sarah said, her breath coming faster. The room felt suddenly very hot. The edges of her vision began to blur. "And isn't it true," Sterling raised his voice, "that you devised a plan to get pregnant by any means necessary to secure the inheritance that you trapped Mr. Jenkins?" "No," Sarah gasped. She felt a sharp pain in her abdomen, a contraction. No, this was different. It was a wave of darkness rising from the floor. "You knew he wanted to leave you," Sterling shouted, pounding the railing. "You knew he loved Jessica, so you stole a stranger's sperm to anchor him to you, didn't you?" I didn't." Sarah's hand flew to her chest. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Thump, thump, thump. She looked at Robert. He was leaning back in his chair, watching her with a look of utter boredom. Next to him, Jessica was whispering something, covering her mouth to hide a smile. They are enjoying this, Sarah thought. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. "Answer the question, Mrs. Jenkins," Sterling barked. "Admit the child is a bastard." The room tilted. The judge's face elongated. The sound of the radiator became a roar. Sarah tried to speak, but her tongue felt thick. The darkness swallowed her. Her eyes rolled back, her knees buckled. Thud. It was a heavy, sickening sound. Sarah collapsed sideways out of the witness box, hitting the floor hard. Her head bounced once against the wood. "Sarah!" Cohen screamed, dropping his papers. Chaos erupted. "Bailiff medic!" Judge Harrison was on his feet, shouting. Cohen scrambled over the railing, kneeling beside her. "Sarah, can you hear me?" She was pale as a sheet. Her breathing was shallow. Across the aisle, Robert didn't move. He didn't stand up. He checked his watch. "Is this really necessary?" Robert said loud enough for the stenographer to hear. "She's always been dramatic." Jessica giggled, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "God, she'll do anything to delay the ruling." The bailiff was checking Sarah's pulse. "She's alive, Your Honor. Pulse is thready. We need an ambulance." The word ambulance seemed to pierce the fog in Sarah's brain. She opened her eyes. The ceiling was spinning. No, she thought. If I leave, they win. They'll get a default judgment. They'll take everything. She grabbed Cohen's arm with a grip of steel. "No," she rasped. "Sarah, don't move," Cohen said gently. "Help me up," she whispered. "You fainted, Sarah. You need a hospital." "No," she said louder this time. She struggled to her elbows. "If I leave, he wins. Help. Me. Up." The courtroom went silent. Everyone watched as the pregnant woman, bruised and shaking, forced herself to her knees, then to her feet. She swayed dangerously. Cohen supported her weight. She looked at the judge. "I am fine, Your Honor. I want to finish." Judge Harrison looked at her with a mixture of concern and respect. "Mrs. Jenkins, I strongly advise. I want to finish," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. She turned her gaze to Robert. "I want him to hear the truth." Robert's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He looked annoyed. "Very well," the judge said slowly. "Mr. Cohen, get her a glass of water. Mr. Sterling, sit down. We are done with the theatrics. Does the defense have any more evidence?" Sterling looked flushed. His attack had backfired. Instead of looking like a liar, Sarah looked like a martyr. "No further questions," he muttered. "Good," the judge said. "Now, I believe there is the matter of the paternity test." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. This was it. The court ordered a rush DNA analysis on the amniotic fluid sample taken last week, Judge Harrison said, picking up a large, sealed manila envelope. "I have the results here." Robert straightened his tie. He looked at Jessica and winked. This was his moment. He was convinced, absolutely convinced, that the envelope contained his freedom. Jessica sat up straighter, smoothing her dress. She was smiling a predatory, anticipatory smile. She was ready to watch Sarah's final destruction. Judge Harrison held the envelope. The sound of the paper tearing was the loudest thing in the world. Robert leaned over to Sterling. "Watch her face," he whispered. "Ituhao, this is going to be good." Sarah clutched her stomach. She knew the truth, but seeing Robert's confidence made her doubt her own sanity. Could he have rigged the test? Could he have bribed the lab? The judge pulled out a single sheet of paper. He adjusted his glasses. He read it in silence. His expression remained stoic, unreadable. He looked up. He looked at Sarah. Then he looked at Robert. "Mr. Jenkins," the judge said calmly, "you have asserted under oath that there is zero possibility of you being the father of this child. You claimed you were in Tokyo. You claimed your wife was unfaithful." "That's correct, Your Honor," Robert said, his voice booming with confidence. "I'm merely stating facts." "I see," the judge said. "Then you will be surprised to learn that the DNA test confirms with a probability of 99.99% that you are the biological father of Sarah Jenkins's unborn son." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah let out a sob, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. She slumped against Cohen. But Robert didn't look defeated. He looked furious and confused. He stood up, knocking his chair back. "That's impossible." "Mr. Jenkins, sit down," the judge warned. "No, it's a lie. The test is wrong, or she bribed the lab." Robert shouted, his face turning red. "It is physically impossible. DNA doesn't lie." "Mr. Jenkins," the judge said, "it does when I had a vasectomy 3 years ago." Robert screamed. The courtroom gasped. Even Sterling, his lawyer, looked shocked. He clearly didn't know this. "A vasectomy?" the judge asked, eyebrows raised. "Yes." Robert was panting now, desperation taking over. "I had a secret vasectomy at the Klein Clinic in Zurich, Switzerland, 3 years ago. I have the records. I did it specifically because I knew I wanted to leave her, and I didn't want to get trapped. So you see, she had to have cheated. That baby cannot be mine." Robert looked around the room triumphantly. He had played his ace. He had revealed his dark secret to prove his wife's infidelity. "I have the documents right here." Robert reached into his briefcase and pulled out a file with German headers. "I paid $50,000 for the procedure and the anonymity. I am sterile." Jessica was nodding vigorously next to him. "He told me," she piped up. "He told me he was sterile. That's how we know she's a whore." Sarah stared at them. The logic didn't make sense. Cohen stood up slowly. He held a different stack of papers. A strange, cold smile played on his lips. "Mr. Jenkins," Cohen said, his voice cutting through the noise. "You just admitted under oath to having a vasectomy 3 years ago." "Yes, to prove she's a liar." "And you are absolutely certain you are sterile?" 100%, Robert sneered. Cohen walked to the center of the room. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, if I may, I also subpoenaed the records from the Klein Clinic in Zurich. It took some international legal wrangling, but Swiss banking secrecy doesn't apply to medical fraud investigations." "Fraud?" Robert frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Mr. Jenkins," Cohen said, facing Robert. "You didn't pay for a vasectomy." "I did. I have the receipt." "No." Cohen shook his head. "You paid a man named Dr. Kruger $50,000. Dr. Kruger was arrested 6 months ago by Swiss authorities. Do you know what for?" Robert went pale. He was running a scam. Cohen continued pacing the floor. "He took money from wealthy, unfaithful men who wanted to hide assets or fake medical procedures. He gave you a certificate, Mr. Jenkins, but he never performed the surgery. He put you under anesthesia, made a small incision to leave a scar, and woke you up. He never cut the vas deferens." That's ridiculous," Robert stammered. "Is it?" Cohen handed a document to the judge. "Here is the affidavit from the Swiss prosecutor. Patient list included. Robert Jenkins' procedure faked. You are not sterile, Mr. Jenkins. You never were. Which explains why the DNA test for Sarah's baby is a match. It is your son." Robert sank back into his chair. He looked like he had been slapped. The sterility trap he had set for Sarah had snapped shut on his own leg. But Cohen wasn't done. He turned slowly, pivoting on his heel to face the defense table again. But this time, he wasn't looking at Robert. He was looking at Jessica. Jessica was no longer smiling. Her face had gone chalk white. Her hands were clutching her baby bump so hard her knuckles were white. "Now," Cohen said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "this brings us to an interesting logical predicament." The judge leaned forward. "Go on, Mr. Cohen." "Mr. Jenkins," Cohen said, "you believed you were sterile. You were absolutely convinced of it, enough to scream it in open court." "Yes," Robert mumbled, head in his hands. "So," Cohen pointed a finger at Jessica, "if you believed you were sterile, how exactly did you think Miss Reynolds got pregnant?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Robert's head snapped up. He looked at Cohen. Then he turned very slowly to look at Jessica. The realization dawned on his face. It was a slow, horrific transformation. He had been so focused on destroying Sarah, so convinced of his own sterility, that he hadn't done the math on his mistress. If he thought he couldn't get Sarah pregnant, he shouldn't have been able to get Jessica pregnant either. But Jessica was pregnant. "Rob," Jessica whispered, her voice shaking. "Rob, don't listen to him. It's a miracle. You know doctors make mistakes. Maybe the vasectomy healed just like with Sarah." "But the vasectomy never happened, Jessica," Cohen interjected smoothly. "We just established that. Robert is fertile, so he could be the father of your baby." Jessica exhaled, looking relieved. "See, exactly. He's the father. It's fine." "Is it?" Cohen reached into his file again. "Because I found something else in the financial discovery. Mr. Jenkins, you share a credit card with Miss Reynolds, correct?" "Yes," Robert said, his voice hollow. "I noticed a recurring charge," Cohen said, "to a luxury rentals company, a condo in the city. But Robert, you live in Lake Forest. Who lives in the condo?" "I don't know," Robert said. "Jessica handles the expenses." "I investigated the address," Cohen said. "The doorman knows Miss Reynolds well. She visits every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. He also knows the man who lives there. A personal trainer named... what was it? Ah, yes. Gavin." Jessica stood up. "Stop it. This is irrelevant." "Is it?" Cohen asked. "Because if Robert is the father of Sarah's baby, that's settled. But since we are discussing custody and character, I took the liberty of grabbing a coffee cup Gavin threw away yesterday, and I compared it to the prenatal non-invasive paternity test you took at the clinic, Jessica. You didn't secure that file very well." "You can't do that," Jessica shrieked. "Mr. Cohen," the judge warned, "this is highly irregular." "It goes to the credibility of the witness, Your Honor," Cohen argued. "She testified she is carrying Mr. Jenkins's true heir, but the preliminary markers suggest a 0% match to Robert Jenkins." Cohen slammed the paper on the table. "Robert isn't the father of your baby, Jessica. Gavin is." Robert stood up slowly. He looked at the woman he had destroyed his marriage for, the woman he had evicted his pregnant wife for, the woman he was building a new life with. "Jess," Robert asked, his voice breaking, "is it true?" Jessica looked around the room, trapped. Her veneer of sophistication crumbled. Her face twisted into a snarl. "You were boring, Rob," she screamed. "You were always working, and you told me you were sterile. I wanted a baby. I needed insurance. What was I supposed to do?" The silence in the courtroom was broken only by the scratching of the stenographer's machine. Sarah sat back in her chair, holding her stomach. The pain was still there, but the weight on her chest was gone. Robert Jenkins stood alone in the wreckage of his own making. He had paid for a fake vasectomy to frame his loyal wife, only to find out he was fertile for the child he rejected, and the miracle baby with his mistress was actually the result of her affair with a personal trainer. Judge Harrison took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "In 30 years on the bench," the judge said, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "I have never seen a mess quite like this." He picked up his gavel. "I have heard enough. I am ready to rule." The silence that followed Judge Harrison's statement was heavy, filled with the dust of shattered egos and broken lies. Robert Jenkins stood frozen, his mouth slightly ajar, looking between the weeping Sarah and the furious Jessica. The man who had walked into the courthouse feeling like a king was now stripped naked in the eyes of the law. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked directly at Robert. "Mr. Jenkins," the judge began. his voice dropping to a register that vibrated with suppressed anger. In family court, we see bad marriages every day. We see people who fall out of love. We see anger. But rarely, very rarely, do we see calculated malice of this magnitude. Robert tried to stammer a defense. Your Honor, I was misled. The Swiss doctor. You attempted to defraud this court. The judge cut him off sharply. You engaged in an illegal scheme to fake a medical procedure for the sole purpose of denying paternity of your own child and disinheriting your wife. You froze the assets of a woman 8 months pregnant. You inflicted intentional emotional distress that led to her hospitalization in my courtroom today. The judge turned a page in his file. You invoked the morality clause of your prenuptial agreement to deny Mrs. Jenkins support. I find that ironic, because I am invoking that very same clause right now against you. Robert's eyes widened. What? The clause states that any party engaging in fraud, criminal activity, or gross moral turpitude forfeits their claim to marital assets. By hiring a criminal to fake a surgery and hiding funds in Switzerland, you have violated that clause. The prenuptial agreement is void. Arthur Sterling. Robert's expensive lawyer closed his briefcase. He knew when a ship had sunk. He wasn't going down with it. The ruling is as follows, Judge Harrison declared, his pen scratching loudly across the order. First sole legal and physical custody of the unborn male child is awarded to Sarah Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins, due to your flight risk and unstable behavior, you are granted supervised visitation only pending a psychological evaluation. Sarah let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 6 months. Second, the judge continued, the marital home in Lake Forest is awarded to Mrs. Jenkins effective immediately. Mr. Jenkins, you have 24 hours to vacate the premises. If you are found on the property after noon tomorrow, you will be arrested for trespassing. But, Robert started, that house is my masterpiece. It is now your penance, the judge snapped. Third, regarding finances. Since you attempted to hide assets, the court is awarding Mrs. Jenkins 100% of the recognized marital savings and 50% of your future earnings from the architectural firm for the next 15 years as punitive alimony. You're bankrupting me, Robert screamed, his composure finally shattering completely. You bankrupted yourself, sir, morally and financially. The judge then turned his cold gaze to Jessica. As for you, Ms. Reynolds, while this court does not have jurisdiction over your paternity issues, I am forwarding the transcript of this trial to the district attorney's office to investigate your involvement in the conspiracy to defraud Mrs. Jenkins. I suggest you find a lawyer, a better one than Mr. Jenkins. Court is adjourned. The gavel banged. It was the sweetest sound Sarah had ever heard. The aftermath was chaotic. Robert turned to Jessica, his face purple with rage. You knew the baby was the trainer's. Jessica, realizing the gravy train had not only derailed but exploded, dropped the innocent act. She sneered at him, grabbing her purse. At least Gavin has abs, and he didn't have to pay a Swiss con man to feel like a man. You're pathetic, Rob. Have fun visiting your kid in a supervised center. She stormed out, the click-clack of her heels sounding like gunfire. Robert stood alone. He looked at Sarah, who was being helped to her feet by David Cohen. She looked tired, messy, and bruised, but she stood tall. He walked over to her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, pathetic pleading. Sarah, he said, reaching out a hand. Sarah, please. I didn't know. The doctor in Zurich. He tricked me. If I had known I could have children, if I had known it was really mine. Sarah looked at his hand, the hand that used to hold hers, the hand that had signed the papers to evict her. "It wouldn't have mattered, Rob," she said softly. "Of course it would. We can fix this. I can fire Jessica. We can go back to the house. I can explain to the judge." "No," Sarah said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was just done. "You didn't leave me because you thought I cheated. You left me because you found something shinier. You were willing to let our son starve to save money. You watched me faint and checked your watch. I was stressed." "Goodbye, Robert," Sarah said. She turned to David. "Let's go. I have a house to get back to." The next day, Sarah drove up the long driveway of the Lake Forest estate. It was raining, washing away the grime of the city. Robert's car was gone. But true to his spiteful nature, he had left the front door wide open, letting the rain blow into the foyer. Sarah walked in. The house was quiet. Jessica's modern touches the grey slate. The cold art felt alien, but the bones of the house were still the same. She walked into the living room. On the floor, discarded in a pile of trash, was her grandmother's recipe book. Robert must have thrown it there on his way out. She picked it up, dusting off the cover. She walked to the kitchen, placed it on the counter, and looked out the window at the garden. It was overgrown, but the roots were strong. 2 weeks later, on a crisp Tuesday morning, Sarah went into labor. There was no panicked drive with her husband screaming at traffic. There was just Sarah, her sister, who had flown in from Ohio, and a sense of profound purpose. At 4:12 p.m., Leo David Jenkins was born. He weighed 7 pounds 6 ounces. He had Sarah's nose and unfortunately Robert's chin. But when he opened his eyes, they were clear and kind. When the nurse handed him to her, Sarah felt the final piece of her heart snap back into place. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a mother. She was a survivor. 6 months later. The Lake Forest house had changed. The cold grey tiles were covered with soft, colourful rugs. The living room was no longer a showroom. It was an obstacle course of toys, bouncy seats and blankets. Sarah sat on the porch, rocking Leo. She looked better than she had in years. The stress weight was gone, her skin was glowing, and she was smiling a real smile, not the brave mask she had worn for so long. A car pulled up to the gate. It was a modest sedan, a far cry from the luxury vehicles that used to park there. Robert stepped out. He looked older. His hair was thinning. His suit was off the rack, and his posture was defeated. It was his scheduled visitation day. He walked up to the porch, stopping at the bottom of the steps. The court order stated he couldn't enter the house. "He's grown," Robert said, looking at the baby with a hunger that was painful to watch. "Yes," Sarah said, adjusting the blanket. "He's rolling over now." "Sarah," Robert said, his voice cracking. I live in a studio apartment now. The firm fired me after the scandal. No one wants to hire an architect who defrauded the court." "I heard," Sarah said neutrally. "I miss this," he said, gesturing to the house, but looking at her. "I miss us. Is there any chance? For Leo's sake." Sarah looked down at her son. Leo was safe. He was loved. He had a mother who would burn the world down to protect him. She looked back at Robert. She didn't feel hate. She felt pity. He had built an empire on sand, and he was surprised when it washed away. "Leo has everything he needs, Robert," she said firmly. "You have your hour. Do you want to hold him, or do you want to talk about yourself?" Robert swallowed hard. He walked up the steps, sat on the swing at the far end, and held out his arms. Sarah handed him the baby. For a moment, watching Robert hold the son, he tried to disown the tragedy of it all, hit her. He had won the rat race, but he had lost the prize. As the sun set over the estate that was now hers, Sarah realized that the DNA test hadn't just revealed a father. It had revealed who they really were. It showed Robert as a fool, Jessica as a fraud, and Sarah as a warrior. And as she took a sip of her tea, watching the man who broke her heart try to bond with the child he didn't want, she knew one thing for certain. The best revenge wasn't anger. It wasn't hate. It was happiness. Sarah Jenkins walked through fire to save her child, proving that a mother's instinct is more powerful than any lawyer, any lie, or any amount of money. Robert and Jessica thought they could rewrite reality with arrogance and greed, but they forgot that the truth, like a seed buried in the dark, will always find a way to the light. In the end, Robert lost his fortune, his reputation, and his family, leaving him with nothing but the cold realization of his own mistakes. Sarah didn't just survive. She triumphed, turning a house of betrayal into a home of love. What do you think? Was the judge's punishment harsh enough for Robert? Should he have been allowed to see the baby at all after what he did? And what about Jessica? Do you think she got what she deserved with the personal trainer? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most gripping, real-life dramas and stories of justice served every single week. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a twist. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.